Okay, good morning, everybody. I'll call a meeting of the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District to order for Thursday, October 16th. Let's see here. We have Commissioner Murphy is absent. Commissioners Bookland and Lankala are participating virtually. And then the remaining commissioners are in person in the room. Okay, so welcome to any of our guests. And then do we have virtual meeting guidance?
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, and staff. To help us have a smooth meeting, I'm going to review just a few decorum rules for all. While the Commission and staff are in person, we are still offering a Zoom option so members of the public can attend. If you are attending virtually and would like to speak, you can do so during appearances by the public. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and streamed live on YouTube. And the public chat has been disabled, but you can still send messages to the host if need be. Finally, Commissioners, please use your microphones while speaking and make sure your voice is directed towards the mic. When you are not speaking, please ensure your mic is off so others can utilize the mics. As a reminder, only 3 of the table mics can be live at a time. Also, please state your name before speaking for those who may be joining us via Zoom. Those are the decorum rules of the District Commission. Thank you for following them, and let's have a great meeting.
Okay, thank you. Any announcements?
I have 2. Bill Walker, Deputy Executive Director. First, you've already noticed this, but I'll highlight it for you. There's an item for the MG&E option to lease for the solar field. We talked about this, I forget when, a month ago or so, and we promised to bring back that lease for approval, and here it is on consent, and you can let us know if you have questions. And then second, in the packet are answers to the various questions asked last time. One question is not in there. That's the question of how plan review fees are updated. We're going to defer that to the next meeting when we're bringing plan review fees for action.
Okay, thank you, Bill. And you're going to introduce the new HR manager?
I'm very excited about this. I'm introducing our new HR manager, Angela Tessner. Angela comes to us from the Madison School District, where she was HR Operations Director. Before that, in her HR career, she worked for Employee Trust Funds, Wisconsin Department of Administration, where I also used to work, and the UW, where I have never worked. Before that, she had a teaching career in elementary education, so if you find yourself being corrected, that's why. She grew up in Janesville, lives in the DeForest area with her husband and 2 Westies. There are 2 things that excite me most about having her here. First, she has a lot of experience helping organizations through change, big periods of change, which we are in right now with the organizational design. And second, she's experienced and ready to be part of the implementation of Workday, our ERP, another big deal. So please join me in welcoming her to our team.
Welcome, District, Angela. Okay, any appearances by the public? Seeing none, nobody online. Don't see any hands up. Excuse me. We'll move to the consent calendar where we have the minutes of 9/25, cash statement capital fund. We have several sanitary sewer extension plans. Authorized agreement to MG&E that Bill had just mentioned, and then authorized agreement for transfer of sanitary facilities. Do we have any questions on any of those items before we get a motion? Okay, seeing none, do we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
This is Commissioner Freeze. I'll move approval.
Motion by Commissioner Freeze.
Second.
Second by Commissioner Lytle. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
One abstention, Tom. Commissioner
Okay.
Clark.
Commissioner Clark abstains. Okay, motion carries. Let's see, that will take us to the deliberation and direction on the 2026 operating capital projects and debt service budgets. So, as Bill mentioned, there's the information that answered the responses to the questions that were brought up last meeting after the public hearing. If anybody wants to make any alteration or change to the district's proposed budget, I'd ask that you do it by motion, and then we get a second, so that we can track it. We're not approving the budget today, but at least using a motion and a second, then, and with a vote, will give distinct commission recommendation or direction to the staff as to how to change the budget for the next meeting when we'll act to approve the budget. So they'll do that now and then, have any changes. So anybody want to make any recommendations to change or alter the budget, or have any other discussion on, deliberate on anything on the budget? Oh, Eric, you wanted to say a few things. Sorry.
Yeah, Eric Dundee, Executive Director. So as you guys have this discussion, just wanted to give a little information. So first, this is, my proposed budget at the 4.7%. We did present this to the Dane County cities and villages with positive comments. We've also gotten, I have gotten via email, informal support from McFarland and Windsor via email. So just wanted to give that information to the commission as you do that. I also have one thing that I need to bring up and correct from our last meeting. So I got asked the question about district management structure in the new org alignment, and I have to tell you I was incorrect. I was wrong when I said that there was a reduction in directors and manager number, and you'll see that in the question responses here. It's actually neutral, 15 to 15. My mistake.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else have anything they wish to discuss or deliberate or make a motion to? Dan?
I make a motion to change that, by using excess reserves from this year and from the capital and moving like 1.5 million, I think, across, and there is space to do that.
Okay, so we have a motion to amend the budget to go to an increase of 2.5% by shifting capital reserves from various accounts to offset the increase. Okay, do we have a second on that? Do we have a second? You want to speak to that anymore, or?
Yeah, because currently there's an excess of probably 1.5-ish in this year's expenses or revenue over expenses that isn't included in the budget calculations. If you take that into account, you'll get it closer to 2.5%. The 26 or the 25 estimates, the expenses are high. I'd rather see it lower down so communities don't have to pay the increase. That will end up giving it to them next year. Why not give it to this year to keep their fees down? And then there's also additional reserves in the capital and debt service. You could do the same thing. There's more. You could actually lower it to zero if you wanted to increase. But I don't think that's correct. I'm just trying to use this year's reserve that should be pushed onto this, and then anything else just to try to. I mean, inflation's running at 2.6%, 2.7%. I would say we try to stay within on the inflation area increases, unless there's. This is just looking at the operating, basically. So trying to stay with the inflation rate of going increases from there. Just trying to be cognizant of the communities have been mad over the last few years of all the increases. Trying to get it back to where it should be, probably, as an inflation rate.
So I have a question. Where's the 1.5 that Dan mentioned that's saved but not accounted for?
Commissioner Pulse, you're talking about reserves in the capital and debt funds, correct?
No, I'm talking about 25's operating, I'll have an excess.
Ah, well, you can explain that as well as I can.
You know where, you made the numbers.
Sure. I think the point that's on the table here is when we estimated expenditures for the year 2025, the year we're in right now, we set that estimate at the 2025 budget. And there's an answer to a question about why we did that. But Commissioner Pulse's point is it's a reasonable expectation that we will end 2025 having spent less than the budget. In the Finance Committee, we did a sort of preliminary estimate of end-of-year final numbers. That may change or it may not, but Commissioner Pulse's point is you could relatively safely reduce revenue in 2026 in the belief that 2025 spending would be down and in the recognition that the reserves for 2026 under this budget are higher than they strictly have to be. And that those numbers could all work just fine. The consequence there is one we also addressed in a question, which is assuming spending in 2026 proceeds as described in the budget, there'll have to be a higher increase in 2027. But that's just an offset. That can also work if the commission would prefer that. Lower now, higher later. That can work just as well as what we introduced.
Because, I mean, almost most years you've been very conservative in creating your budgets, and there's always been an excess reserve. Just trying to catch up to that. And, yeah, we see big projects happening in the future, but it seems like due to staffing of Kramer and all the rest of the people that do all the work, they never can get what the increases that we're going to hope to get done next year. I mean, that's just in reality of construction, stuff like that. So why are we penalizing people now when they can save the money now? Maybe they have to pay for it in the future, but we don't know what the future is. It could be less in the future. Or it could be just totally government changes their ideas and we have to do all this stuff. We can't predict the future, just try to worry about the next 12 months. Just trying to, the communities would like to see lower increases every year, so just trying to give them a wanted.
Okay, so the way I understand it is that 1.5 is based on the estimation that we have in the budget compared to what we may actually have. You're thinking that we'll have 1.5 less in expenditures in the operating budget than what's estimated in the budget. So that money would then next year flow into the cash reserves. And then I don't know what that does with our percent of cash reserves, if it takes us way up or over or whatever.
It would just take we would have more money to reduce future fees. Well, look, I mean, it's just, we're not losing the money, it's just being pushed out. Why not use it now?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll just add one more point. That forecast of 2025 total operating budget spending was done through, I believe, through the end of September. So there's a quarter left where things may or may not change. So it's a forecast at the end of the year that we're talking about.
Ken?
I will second Commissioner Pulse's motion so we can discuss this further and have a vote on it.
Motion by Commissioner Paul, second by Commissioner Clark to transfer funds to $1.5 million from the operating budget and anticipated over expenditure or under expenditure in the operating budget. Correct?
If I may, let me make this more precise. As I understand it, the motion is merely to amend the operating budget as introduced so that service charges are set at a dollar amount equivalent to a 2.5% increase over the 2025 budgeted amount, and all other things can flow through from that. We don't have to specify anything other than set your service charges at that level.
Just, the funding is coming from this year's excess.
Yeah.
So the columns, like if you look at the one column that said 25, basically you're going to end up with a net reserve higher by 1.5, which would move it to 26. We'd still be in compliance with reserves for 26 then.
So the point I'm making here is that the action is to set service charge lower service charge is lower than what we introduced. The discussion about reserves and spending, that's sort of background and justification for the motion, but the motion itself, that service charge is lower than what we introduced them as.
Okay, so this would alter the service charges from the 4.7% down to 2.5%. And the idea is that there'll be excess funding by underspending in the operating budget and through other savings. Ken?
And my question on this, I think this is a good thought process. My question is if the district does not experience that at the end of the year, I don't want to go backwards on the budget. The question is more is if district does experience an overage, what do we do with that money? And my concern about adjusting rates down is that we're still managing to a theoretical overage versus an actual.
There is also there's reserves in the other two funds that could be used to make the operating budget back to 2.5%. There's enough money. In total, there's probably like 3.5 or 3 million of excess reserves, either actual or estimated to be for this year. If for some reason it doesn't come in at 1.5 excess, it's only 1.0, there's no need to change anything. It's just the reserve money just will swish back and forth. There's no additional money that wouldn't have to increase the budget on anything or decrease the budget on anything. Funds are there.
Okay, and so my other question on this too is, do we kick the can into 27 and what does that look like? I wanted to second the motion for discussion.
Commissioner Bookland has her hand raised.
Well, can we get anybody have an answer to Ken's question about how this affects the 27 budget? Might be too early to say.
If I understand your question, Bill Walker again, I think we're discussing the suggestion in question 5. And there is a table in question 5 which offers various service charge, differing service charge levels. So the first row is 4.7% as we introduced. The bottom row, which I've labeled option C, would result in a 2.2% service charge increase. So for discussion purposes, we can treat that as very similar to the motion here. If nothing else changes in the way the budget plays out, to make things work in 27, we would require a 9.1% increase. The point, I think, of Commissioner Pauls's motion is maybe an anticipation or a willingness to take a risk that things would change, and that, in fact, we would spend less than we were assuming in the introduction of the budget. So I think the way I think about your question, Commissioner Clark, is you're basically discussing which risk you would prefer. The risk of ending up with more money in 2027 or the risk of ending up with less money in 2027. And as Commissioner Paulse noted, traditionally we have erred on the side of ending up with more money.
My hurdle with that, since I've been on the commission, is that that's found money, and it doesn't ever seem to be a reduction in something in the future. That's where we need to, I think our member communities would prefer that we get a little bit more of a financial grasp on that process.
Commissioner Bookland? Beth, do you have a question? Badri, you have your hand up. Why don't we go to you? Oh.
Yep.
Beth,
I'm sorry.
are you there?
Yeah, I am. I'm sorry. It took me a minute to unmute. I have a concern about the next year going up too much in service charges next year with such a drastic cut. So, and I hear that there's a risk, you know, we don't know what's going to happen next year, and you know, the uncertainty, but I'm just wondering, do we have to make the cut so big that it's, you know, down to like 2.5% increase? Could we find a middle ground? Because I am concerned that next year rolls around, we're going to be in a situation where we may have a bigger increase than our communities would like. So could we find a happy medium in this? That's my question. Do we have to go down to a 2.5%? Could we do a 3.5% and find a happy medium?
Okay, Badri, why don't we go to Badri and then we'll, we can discuss your question after we get Badri's.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
I have a similar one, right? So I think if we have looked at the presentations, I think 2027 was showing going up. Could you guys actually bring up that number for what was the projection? If I remember correctly, for this one, we were saying 4, I think it was going up for the following year. So if we are projecting already going up, and if the number changes, and then it's going to be just, I think looking at those numbers is going to be helpful than making the decision here before. Thank you.
Okay, so, what, can you be more specific what graph you're wanting from the staff report, Badri, or from the budget?
Question
Oh.
5, Tom, the same one that Bill was referring to. It shows going up to 6.4, I believe, proposed as submitted.
That is correct. Yeah, I thought
Yep.
it was somewhere closer to 7.
What Bill's working on for me is what we're talking in terms of millions of dollars. So for example, if we were to ask, just take part of it, the 1.5 estimated change in the operating budget, what is that in terms of percent? You know, like whatever, how many $100,000 or 1% is X, you know, so if we can, but does anybody have any thoughts on, so Badri and Beth basically had the same question. Anybody have on thoughts on splitting the needle between 4.7 and 2.5? You're willing to go partially down. So I'm willing to consider maybe the 1.5 million, take a risk on that. But that's why I want to know what that does to the service charges. So Bill's kind of, my question is, if we just took the 1.5 million that's from the operating, anticipated savings in the operating budget, what percent decrease would that be? Or what, or basically, you know, like a standard type of thing, like every percent decrease in the from service charges from 4.7 to 3.7 or 3.7 to how many $1 million are we talking for every percent change? You know? Yeah, I know. There was different ways of looking at it. So my first question is, if we were to just do the 1.5 million, what percent change? Meaning that we account for the 1.5 million anticipated savings that Dan brought up in the operating budget, and we said, okay, we're going to reduce our estimated expenditures from the operating budget 1.5 million, which is part of his discussion as to his reasoning. If we just did that part, what change in service charges does that make?
If we amended the budget so that the 2026 service charge increase was $1.5 million less than what we introduced, the resulting percentage increase would be 2%.
So, Ken?
I have a question for Dan. Dan, would you be okay with your motion, if the overage, if the district does experience an overage, that was applied to the 2027 increase? And keep the budget the way it's currently drafted?
They have. No, I'm just saying, because we constantly push it out. I mean, that's for people to save 16 months from now.
Yeah.
And the money is, I mean, we're gonna end up with 1.5 million in cash at the end of the year, that they won't get any benefit for over a year on that.
Okay. And I would be comfortable if we earmark that 1.5 million towards something versus just...
Well, it will be, next year in theory, the reserve requirement will be changed, therefore they'll reduce the fee. It just won't, it's what's in a whole big bucket type thing.
Let me clarify. I would be okay if the 1.5 million was used to reduce service charges in the future.
Yeah. Would be
And I'm not...
No, I'm just
not trying to talk...
It's just harder to do that, because you would have to run through the budget and subtract it after.
For my benefit, let me make sure I understand. Your suggestion, Mr. Clark, is that we allow 2025 to play out, find out what the actual operating expenditures were, and therefore what free, additional reserves are available. Free is the wrong word. And then use that information to adjust the 2027 budget. Yes, that is a fantastic idea. The only quibble with it is that's what we do every year anyway. So every year when we put the budget together, we consider what has happened in the past and adjust going forward.
That point of interest would be good to know. And I'm glad we're figuring that out.
Because Bill, right now there's like more than $1 million from prior years that we're using currently. The 24 actuals were under budget by a decent amount.
And when you say using, you mean
reducing
helping
the fee.
us reserve?
Yeah. The reserve
correct.
was bigger at 24 than we thought it would be. Therefore, we're using it against 26.
Correct. This is a point I made in one previous presentation where there's a table showing excess reserves in 24 anticipated for 25, and then in the 26 budget, and those excess reserves are going down. So in other words, we've been doing what you're suggesting. When we are aware that there are excess reserves, we take those away.
Okay, Greg?
So for Madison, so I totally understand what Dan's driving at here, but for Madison, more important than the rate increase exact amount is relative stability for us, right? Meaning, so it would be way better for us if let's just say this 1.5 million years, and that would allow us I'm back on the answer to question 5 in the pamphlet, for the 2027 budget. That allowed us to lower the 2027 budget down to 5% or something like that, so that so it went 4.7% this year, 5% next year. That, for me, and for how we run things at the city, is far preferable to, taking this year's down to 2.5 and then maybe still hitting 6.5 next year. That swing causes a lot more calls to our office, right? Because you see that, right? It plays out through our sewer bills, right? And then we get a lot more questions. It's not to say I don't appreciate take the money now and do it later, but again, most of what I hear from my accounting staff is it would be better for us if you guys could say, well, it's 5% every year for the or 4% every year, right? That's not how life works. Variability comes in, but the closer you can stay to a relatively routine increase, is easier for us to budget for, and it's easier for us to explain to customers. It's when things bounce around a little bit that it's harder to explain to our customers as we pass that through. So I understand exactly what Dan's driving at. We discussed this, at some length in the subcommittee last week. I would kind of prefer to drop 27 if we have excess from 25, which is what you would normally do when you redo the budget anyway. Thank you.
Okay, Badri?
Yeah, I just wanted to agree with Commissioner Freeze on this one, right? So going from 2%, we were thinking about 6 for 27, but actually it might go up to even 8%, right? So jumping from 2 to 8% is a really hard number to justify from every angle to all the customers. Staying in the medium is probably safer. Just huge jump in numbers is going to be a hard one to justify with customers.
Okay, Patrick?
Yeah, Commissioner Lytle, I have to thank Dan for some education that he's provided to the Finance Committee over the last couple of meetings we've had. And some of the takeaways I've had from our Finance Committee discussions are related to the comfort level and the conservative nature that staff have taken in terms of making sure we hit with nearly 100% certainty our required reserves as planned. And the exercise we asked them to go through with this, which generated the approximately 1.5 in excess reserves that are likely to occur in the operating fund at the end of 2025. I still believe they were being quite conservative, but the issue that's come up again and again is prior to implementing an ERP that allows us to make both allocations and projections of revenues and expenses across a calendar year or a fiscal year in this case, and a way to accurately project those actual expenditures and projected expenditures. There has been the approach to err on the side of conservative, collecting additional revenues to make sure we don't find ourselves in a shortfall situation. And I think that's led the district to have excess, not spend as much as we've included in our budget. And if I thought there wasn't an approach in place to reduce the amount we're doing that going forward, I'd be less comfortable with that reserve amount staying above our target. But I think I have to agree with Commissioner Freeze that until we have some better data fidelity around that in a year, year and a half, where we have better tracking, I'm inclined to keep the increases as consistent as possible, even if that does find us collecting some money in service charges that we may not end up spending in 20.
Okay. So it's an interesting dilemma, actually, because we were hearing from our customer communities, and to Dan's point, correct me if I get this wrong, but that they didn't like the idea that we're over collecting money and not spending it, and therefore we have a higher rate increase, and then that extra money goes to cash reserves, which may or may not offset some of the increase the following year. But I had heard from some of the customer, this is what I was hearing, is that they'd rather have a lower, that appropriate increase one year, and we're willing to go up, to have this big fluctuation in increases if that were to occur, because you went to say a 2.5% or 3% increase versus the 4.7, and have that then higher increase later on. That's what I remember hearing from at least some of the cities and villages. So I don't know if that's completely accurate in terms of the operating budget, if that applied more to capital budget. So Eric, do you have an opinion on that? Maybe it applied more to...
Yeah, thank you. Eric Dundee, Executive Director. I would confirm what you just said, President Hovell, that most of the concern I heard when I moved into this position was about capital projects. You're proposing these capital projects to spend money, and you're not spending that money. That's a large amount of money. You know, we're talking tens of millions of dollars versus $1.5 million. So just to put that perspective there.
This is not a new discussion. I've been on the commission a long time, and we've had these similar kind of analogies over the years. I remember Tup Wells, for example, wanting to take cash reserves in 1 year to lower the rate increase or service charge increase, and other commissioners as well over the years were willing to. In some years we did, some years we didn't. Why difference, I can't remember. I think it had to do with the overall budget situation, that, you know, if our cash reserves were really sitting really good, then we were willing to do it, but they weren't as good as we, you know, had anticipated. We weren't willing to do it, but there were years that we did that. We took money from cash reserves. Essentially, it's kind of the same thing we're talking about here, except it's a little different with the estimations being involved. So we have a mixed record, I guess, to put it on that. And Ezra probably recalls that. So, Dan?
One question, Bill, do you have any estimate of what we're going to be under for the capital for the year? Because that 1.5 is just the operating, correct?
Your question is, you're asking about forecasting expenditures in the capital projects budget for 2025.
Right, are you going to be over or under for that?
Our best estimate of that is what is in the budget document itself. And as a reminder for everyone, the practical difference between managing the capital budget and the operating budget, the capital budget is composed of discrete projects, each of which has a very clear schedule. And so it's much easier for us to update through the year what we think spending will be. The operating budget has more surprises in it. It's more of a agglomeration. So I think, to repeat, our best estimate of spending in the capital budget for 2025 is what we built into the budget itself.
Okay, so I want to get back to Beth's question, and Badri had it. What happens if we split and said we're going to use $750,000 and say that we anticipate a savings of $750 in the operating budget? We wish to apply that to this year's service rates. Do you know? Can you give a guess as to what that decrease would be? You know, service charge rate. Yeah, what the service charge would go. No, the other option we have is we could wait till next meeting, you know, where you could calculate this out. Then you'd have to have everything, you know, like two options. Or 1 point.
You're at 61 million-ish for revenue.
61,380.
So if you take 750 out of that, it's 1.2% of that.
Thank you.
That isn't the increase, but that's the change of 61 down.
The accountant has a calculator in his hand, ladies and gentlemen.
So it would take it down to about 3.5%. So that puts it in the range that Beth, I think, was kind of suggesting, that halfway point. Right? Makes sense. Think about it. So, Ezra?
So, appreciate all this conversation. I think I tend to come from a place similar to Greg and Patrick, and you know, I really liked the couple things in the staff's proposed budget. One is really tightening down this concern we heard from customer communities around sort of overestimating what we were going to spend on capital, especially, I think it was, and then not getting there for all the reasons that we can't entirely control, that don't let us always get there. So that's great, and we're much tighter on that going forward, which feels really good. Maybe we'll be able to be even more sort of precise on that with the ERP, as Patrick pointed out. But then we, the other thing that I really care a lot about is smoothing, and we have some big, big critters to swallow a few years out if we're a gator or whatever. My metaphor is just falling apart on its own weight. But and so we have increased needs to spend on important things coming in the capital plan 6 years, and we need to be building and sort of be ready for that. And so that these sort of 5-ish, 6-ish% increases year over year out through the capital plan feel good. It's smooth. It's predictable. It's known in advance, and folks, from how I understand it and see it, can benefit a lot from that. So that's where I start from. I guess if we're gonna, I want to almost zoom out and ask Bill if we're gonna consider this. I only feel comfortable thinking about a thing like this if I can see the impact it's going to have on our expected service charge increases out over that capital planning period of 5 or 6 years. That was something that gave me a lot of comfort in the proposed budget as we've seen it in iterations over the last few months. And so I want to see what this possible change would look like in terms of those service charge increases, all the assumptions being the same out for the next 5, 6 years. And then I could feel comfortable sort of deciding about this weighing of a little bit of savings in the short term, and possibly that means a little bit higher out in the out years. But what does that trade-off look like? I'd need to see all those numbers, not just sort of this year and next. So Bill, the question, I guess, turn that into a question. Could you bring us a couple of options next time? Does having options on the table make things pretty tough, right down to the wire there at our last budget approval meeting, in terms of getting everything in order and getting it out to the communities and all that, or is that a possibility we could consider?
Commentary on that point. There are now 2 topics under discussion. So the first one is, do we have a lower service charge increase in 2026? And the second one is, how do we construct the financing plan over the 6 years, and specifically, where do we try to fit fund reserves in that plan? You'll recall that the plan we introduced has the capital fund in particular, with reserves dropping fairly low, but mostly within the Commission's policy range. And you'll also recall the thinking behind that was, as you suggested, there's large spending in that period. Perhaps it's tolerable to let your reserves go down to kind of ease your way through that. So if we were to come back, we'd have to bring 2 things for discussion. To repeat, what's the impact on 2026 of various service charge changes, and how would the Commission like to represent our 6-year financial plan? With the one key note being that 6-year financial plan is a planning document. It's not authorizing spending. It's not limiting anything. It's an attempt to describe what the future looks like and sort of put things in place that feel like they can work. The one, speak in gross terms, one option is to say we'll lower 2026 service charges and we will change nothing else whatsoever. And I can tell you the result of that right now. The closing fund, the closing balance in the capital fund will be, we use $700,000. $700,000 in every year thereafter if you don't change anything else. The other major option is to say, no, we need to claw that $700,000 back, either in 27 or spread out over 27 and 28. If you do that, of course, you have to collect more revenue. So I can bring back numbers on that, but the concepts are available for you right now. Would you prefer the consequence of lower revenue in 26 to be that much lower reserves going into the future, or would you prefer to put on the table, as it were, for your customers a loose commitment to claw it back in the next couple of years? Only one of those is about the budget itself.
Eric?
Yeah, thank you. I would like to kind of pile on a little bit to Bill Walker's comments. For me, when this discussion is happening, I'm getting nervous because we are talking about the future, and we know we have liquid processing phase 2, one of our largest infrastructure projects in history, looking to be bid next year. A couple percent swing in the bid prices will take this whole conversation into a different direction next year. So I'm just putting that out there, that the discussion this year, if you're going to have it and make decisions this year, be ready for whatever that risk consequence is next year with a very, very large project there. So I just want to leave you with that.
Okay. Is this a fair assumption to say that you were anticipating a 6.4% increase in 27 under the introduced budget? And would that then go up to 1.2% if we had to claw it back? If we're talking 750 or a greater amount. Okay, I think we've kind of beat this to death, but it's been a good discussion. Well, that's why we're going to get a vote on the motion. So Ezra can cover that by a separate motion if he wants to do something in terms of, but right now we still have the motion on the floor about reducing the service charges from 4.7 to 2.5%. That's basically it, right? So all those in favor of that motion say aye. And opposed? Greg? Nay? Nay? Okay. That motion, Badri, you have a question?
No, I'm just voting no.
Voting no, okay. And Beth, how do you vote? Not like we're doing a roll call, but.
I vote no.
Okay, so that motion fails. So do we have any other changes? Ezra, did you want to bring up anything or just leave it? Okay. Okay, do we have any other proposed amendments to the budget? Any other proposed amendments or changes? Okay. Hearing none, I think that covers that part. So, nobody else has anything else they wish to say or deliberate on the budget? Third time? Okay. We'll move on to B, the PFAS compounds. Marty? The budget basically stays as is for consideration at the next meeting.
I don't know. I agree with that. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Marty Griffin. I'm the Director of Ecosystem Services here at the District. I'm here to give a project update on our sampling analysis of Influent, Effluent, and Biosolids for PFAS. And I just want to mention here before I get into the presentation that we've been doing this for a few years now, and it's definitely a team effort. We have a great team at the District and also assistance from consultants with this. So even though I'm here presenting, all the information and data that you see is a team effort to compile it and understand it. So, all right. So for those of you tuning in that may be unfamiliar with the district, just a little level setting so you know the context when I present this additional data. We've been around for about 95 years, and we're a regional sewer district, so we serve multiple communities in Dane County area. We have a lot of infrastructure. We serve a lot of people, and we collect and treat a lot of water. So all that water comes to us, and it really just reflects the communities that we have, that we serve, basically. And so Part of those wastewater constituents, PFAS is ultimately one of those, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. And so just a little baseline on PFAS and how the wastewater treatment fits into that cycle. You know, PFAS isn't just one, it's thousands and thousands of compounds. And because of that, only a handful have really been well studied. I'm going to talk about two of those today, PFOA and PFOS. The thing you need to know about PFAS is they're not straightforward. There's actually precursors to these compounds that can undergo transformation and turn into other PFAS compounds. So that's an interesting twist on these things. But the main concern here is that they don't degrade in the environment, and they've been around historically for a very long time, which means they're in the environment already, and they're in our homes, in our diets already. And so as you can see by this circle, you know, from the wastewater perspective, we're not a generator of these compounds. You can see we're in the middle of the circle. And so in this cycle of pathways, even though we don't generate them, we're part of that. You can see it goes in and out with those arrows. And so we need to understand our part and how we fit into this cycle. So we started doing this with our action plan. We have a district action plan around PFAS. And so we have a few things that we've been doing, and I'll be talking about the sampling portion of this checklist for this presentation. But what we have done is a fate and transport review. That was to get a baseline understanding of our plant processes and what we generate at the plant and our recovered resources and how PFAS relates to those. So that will be like a specific document that is on our website at madsewerpfasinitiative.org that you can see up there on the screen. The other thing we did is understanding how waste acceptance fits in. That's one pathway where we actually can control what comes in. We're talking about waste acceptance that's not through the collection system. And so we understand our ordinance authorities, looking at our industrial permitting program, and also a hauled waste permitting program. So we're doing that as well. The main thing under the website is that we're putting context to all this information that we're talking about. And so we want to make sure that we have good communications around this information and data so our customer communities understand and know what we're talking about. And our phase sampling and analysis plan, we've been doing that since 2021. And so we basically are using that as a blueprint to close those gaps in data that we learned from our fate and transport study that we did earlier. And of course, pollution prevention, that is the strategy outlined in our district action plan to minimize sources of PFAS to the treatment plant. So we're starting with industrial users, commercial users, and we're looking at conversations with those to figure out how we can minimize those sources to the treatment plant. So as I mentioned before, we've been doing this since 2021. And in 2021, all we did was a snapshot. We took one sample. We wanted to answer three basic questions. What's coming to the plant? What's leaving the plant? And what's used in our processes that could be contributing to PFAS, and that was mainly the polymer, right? We switched over in 2022 to start adding a more temporal aspect. So instead of a snapshot, we started collecting data over time. And so we looked at our influent, effluent, monthly, and quarterly, so we added a temporal component. The other thing we did in 2022 was to better understand some of the data gaps in our fate and transport plan, specific to our biosolids processes. So we looked at some of the processes and endpoints within our biosolids process to understand a little bit better how PFAS behaves in our biosolids treatment train. In 2023, we continued our monthly and quarterly monitoring, so now we're up to 2 years of monitoring. And what we did in 2023 was we wanted to make sure that we lined up with the Wisconsin DNR monitoring protocols, so we have continuous data set that we can compare over time. The other thing we did is made sure our sampling protocols for our biosolids also lined up with those DNR protocols. And that brings us to 2024. That's what I'm going to talk about today, our 2024 results. So again, in 2024, we continued our monthly and quarterly monitoring of our influent, effluent, and biosolids. So that'll give us up to 3 now continuous years, which is pretty exciting. And then we also made sure that this continuous data set, as I mentioned before, aligns with those DNR monitoring protocols. This year in 2024, similar to what we did in 2023, we actually are looking at our sampling methodology for our effluent. Interestingly, the DNR requirements actually give you a choice on how you want to sample your effluent. There's 2 different ways to do that, and so we wanted to look at both of those to make sure that how we choose to do it when this requirement is in our permit is truly representative of the district's effluent when it comes to these compounds. All right, so I'm going to get into the data here. Starting with our Influent, so a couple of things I need to note before I start showing graphs up there and you start trying to read numbers that you can't read. Again, I'm really going to focus on PFOA and PFOS. Those are the two compounds that are currently anticipated to be in our updated permit, and so I'm going to look at those. If you want to look at all the 33 compounds that we actually tested for, you can go on the website again, madsewerpfasinitiative.org. We have our full report there, which does have graphs and data for the full 33 PFAS compounds. But for these purposes, you're only going to see PFOA and PFOS. The other thing I'll note about Influent specifically, when you look at the data, there's no regulatory criteria for Influent. There's no regulations on what comes to us, and that obviously makes sense. That circular pathway, as I showed you. But we do want to look at the Influent. It's an important piece of data for us because it tells us what's coming to the plant. It helps us know how concentrations change over time. It helps us understand the influence of our Influent on our effluent and biosolids, and actually helps as we start getting into those source reduction, pollution prevention I talked about. It helps us sort of monitor and track how well we're doing with that. All right, so Influent comes into the plant, 5 different force mains, okay? So we were able to sample each individual force main, which allows us to look at the data in that particular way. Individual PFAS coming from all different force mains. We also have the ability to do a composite sample where we take a larger sample compositive of the different flow weights of the Influent, and so it gives us a composite sample that we can look at to sort of look at all 5 force mains together, right? 2022, we did a calculation to do that. 2023 and 2024, we actually took a sampler and did aliquots flow weighted to actually get that number. So you'll see that in the data as well. All right, so enough talking. PFOA, let's start with that. This particular graph is showing each individual force main for each month that we're actually able to sample. Just a note, we did have monthly sampling, but in 2024 we had quarterly sampling of our force mains. This graph is shown in part per trillion or nanograms per liter or part per trillion, so that's what we're talking about. You can see the shaded areas, that's just so you can see blocks of time. So the darkest shaded area is our 2022, the lighter shaded area is 2023, and no shading is 2024. So you can sort of use your eyes to group together. So the first thing you're going to notice on this graph is that the lines go up and down and up and down, right? So there's differences over time. We have high variability. I wouldn't say high. We have variability in our information. In 2024, if you just focus on that non-shaded area, that range is going from about 1.2 to 11, so pretty variable. And you can see over time, our variability is within itself, right? So if you kind of look at the upper and lower bounds of that, it's pretty stable in there, which is interesting. The other thing you'll notice over time is that we have 2 particular colors, that blue and that red. That equates to force mains 7 and 18. And so those are consistently higher than the others. We really don't have a reason or we'll understand why that is, but having a temporal data set like this just helps us understand how PFAS is coming to us from our different sewer sheds in our area. The one line I do want to point out, which is that very, very dark line in the middle, that's that composite line I was telling you about, and you can see it tracks pretty well right in the middle of all the force mains, so it makes sense that that's a composite. And that's pretty variable, but pretty consistent as you look through, right? It goes up and down, but it's in a pretty narrow range, and that's pretty good for us because that basically tells us there's no, really large continual sources of blasted PFOA coming to the plant, and that's a good thing to know for us. Same thing for PFOS, right? I'm not going to go through the details of the graph like I just did, but I just wanted to show you that we still have that same pattern. The range is a little bit different, right? The range for PFOS is a little larger than PFOA. Here we're going from, what do I have here? Here we're going from about non-detect to about 13 before we're only going up to about 7. So it's a little larger range, but it's to be expected. The one thing I do want to point out is we do have some big spikes, and there's a big spike in 2024. And that big spike is pretty high, and that is something I want to point out. That was our November Influent result, and so that was at about 19 nanograms per liter. So that's the highest measured influent amount we've had over our sampling. So I do want to point that out, that that's there, but again, it's variable. So that's just a result. So when you get a result like that, you want to know why, right? And so that's why that's the forced main sampling comes into play. So that large spike in PFOS is in that composite color, that dark blue. Unfortunately, we switched to quarterly sampling of our forced mains in 2024 because we didn't see a need to do monthly because of the variability. And so we did not have a forced main sample, individual forced main sample for that November. So we were unable to say, oh, that spike corresponds to pump station 7 or 18 or some other number. It's just the way it happens with science. So we did a couple more investigations of other potential sources of inputs to the plant, mainly through our septage receiving program or other ways we accept waste, and we weren't able to track down any particular source. So just something for us to know that we do have variability, and sometimes that variability can spike up pretty high in our influent. Wrapping up our influent, again, no continuous single source that I talked about. We have variability. If you look at all the 33 compounds in our report, there's no really like firefighting foam or other like known PFAS source indicators at high concentrations, which tells us that our influent really is representative of our service area, which is pretty much commercial and residential, right? We don't have any huge manufacturers or something we can point to and say, hey, if we get rid of that source, we're going to knock down those numbers that you see. So we reflect the communities we serve, as I said before. And for all the forest mains, we're pretty consistent. We have variability, but it's within that range. We had that high November, so it's good to know that that happens once in a while. And PFOA is lower than PFOS when it comes to what's coming to them. All right, so now we'll move to the more interesting part, which is effluent. So this is our effluent. Couple things to level set on our effluent. For effluent, we do have surface water standards in play. The DNR passed and approved surface water standards for PFOA and PFOS in 2022, which means they phased them into permits as permit reissuance comes up. We're currently in the permit reissuance process, so we're expecting to have PFOA and PFOS considerations in our upcoming permit. The way the permit is expected to operate with these PFAS compounds is the first step is that the DNR requires monitoring and reporting for up to 2 years. And then they actually look at that data and determine if you need a pollution minimization plan and then actually continue on forward from that way. So the way we do our effluent collection is lined up with the way DNR requires that monitoring to occur, so we're in good shape there. And so we collected composite effluent samples monthly, but we also took grab samples monthly through part of it to compare the composite versus grab. Those are the two sample types that DNR allows for. All right, so looking at our effluent, looking at PFOA first, the light blue line is our composite sampling, and then the dark blue is the grab sampling. So you'll only see the dark blue in the 2024 area of the graph. So again, the shaded areas represent over time, so you can see blocks of time. When you look at PFOA, just in our 2024 data, we range from 6 to about 10. And the great news is that the surface water criteria for PFOA is at 95 nanograms per liter, and you can see our graph barely even gets up to our highest spike in, I think that was 2023, which was, basically 15 or something like that. So we're always well below the water quality standard for effluent for PFOA. So that's great news for us. When you look at our grab samples compared to our composite samples, those lines track really, really closely together, and that's great news also. Because if you talk to our lab staff and folks who are responsible for taking these samples, they'll tell you that composite sample and grab samples definitely have a difference in how easy it is to collect those samples. So it's great for us to know that we can get representative data and sample collection methods that are great for our staff to use. All right, looking at PFOS, a little bit different story here. The surface water criteria for PFOS is at 9. You can see that brown dashed line. Again, over time, we're well below it, except we again had one result, and that corresponds to that November influent result, right? Remember, we had a high influent. Well, it's a pass-through compound. Our treatment plant is not designed to treat for these compounds. So you'd expect to see that in an effluent, and that's exactly what we see. We did have one effluent result that was over the surface water criteria for PFOS. Now, the interesting thing to note about this is that the DNR, when it determines compliance with the surface water standard, does not look at individual monthly results. They use a 30-day average and a calculation to determine if you're meeting criteria. So it's a little misleading to have that line on the graph, but it is a good reference point to know that we do have variability from month to month with our sampling, and so it helps inform us to understand how these calculations will occur to determine if we are meeting the surface water standard. I throw this graph up here to compare Influent and our Effluent together because, like I said earlier on in the presentation, our Influent definitely impacts our Effluent, and it's good to understand how that is, right? So looking at the top graph, looking at PFOA, again, it's a pass-through compound, so you'd expect them to look similar. You can see the patterns of the graphs are similar. That's exactly what you'd expect to see in a pass-through compound. If it was truly a pass-through compound, what's coming in will be equal to what's going out. That is not what you're seeing on that top graph of the PFOA, right? Our effluent is higher than our influent. So something's happening within the treatment process that's basically generating PFOA. What's going on there? Well, the cool thing is that there's these other analysis called top assay, which you'll see in the full report. And what that does is it simulates environmental conditions to force that transformation of PFAS I talked about in the very, very early part of the presentation. PFAS has the ability to transform. Those precursors have the ability to transform. So you can force that transformation and understand how your precursors, or if you even have precursors. So if you look at our top assay data, which I'm not showing here, I'll just verbally tell you what it is, it actually showed that there were precursors for the PFOA in our Influent. So that's basically telling us that the ability is there for the transformation, and we're probably seeing that happen right there. That's our best guess as to why we have an increase of PFOA in our effluent compared to Influent. If you look at PFOS, it's a little bit different story. You can see that our effluent is pretty stable. Our influent, is pretty spiky. Most part, they track with each other, but sometimes it's above and sometimes that's below. So again, it can't really be transformation, because if it was transformation, you'd always see it above, right, the blue line. Because it's variable like that, what we're thinking is happening here is that this PFOS is considered a long-chain compound, and the long-chain compounds like to partition or move from the liquid to the solid side. So every time we see that blue line below the orange, we're thinking that sort of is what's happening, is moving out of the liquid side and actually into the solid side. And when we look at our solids data with our biosolids, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You see we'll have high levels of PFOS. So that's what we're thinking is happening here. So these graphs are good to look at because it helps us understand how PFAS behaves. It can transform, but it can also partition, right? So it doesn't just sit idle. It moves around in our processes, and it's good for us to understand how that happens. So here's our summary of our effluent. Again, they differ from month to month. It was pretty consistent, but there is some variability. Great to learn that we're representative with the different types of methodology for collecting the samples. In our effluent, we had that transformation, so PFOS is lower than PFOA. But the great thing is that we're always below the state water quality standards, and that's the most important thing here. All right. Now I'm going to take a break here because we got to switch our whole brains because we're going to biosolids, and it's a whole different scale of measurement and a whole different type of thing we're looking at. Biosolids, again, are regulated by state agencies. There's treatment methods. We have a Class A and a Class B biosolids, right? However, there are no regulatory requirements for PFAS in biosolids. Currently, the way the DNR is addressing PFAS in biosolids is through interim guidance that they have posted online that explains how they're approaching their approach to biosolids. So there are no state standards. We're not expected to have any limits in our permit related to biosolids. However, we are expected to have the same type of monitoring requirements for biosolids in our permit. The district does produce a Class A and a Class B product. Our Class B product is our MetroGrow product, and it's important to know about that product a little bit because of the way PFAS behaves. I just mentioned to you before that some PFAS compounds like to partition from the liquid to the solid side. So there are certain PFAS compounds that just love solids. And so it's important to know that our MetroGrow product is a 5% solid product. So it's not completely solid, but it has some solid components. Our Class A cake product, however, is a lot higher solid. It's a 25% solid product. And you'll see those differences in the data when I put the numbers up there because of the way PFAS likes to behave. So the way we sampled our biosolids is we did that quarterly. That's a quarterly sampling schedule. Both types, our MetroGrow product and our Class A product. We had an interesting ability here because we've been sampling our biosolids over time, and we did a very smart thing, is that when we created our Class A cake product, we kept the piles we created over time, sampled them over time to understand how the PFAS behaves over time. So you'll see data here showing, for instance, our 2024 data from a 2024 Class A pile that was created, but you'll also see 2024 data from piles that were created in 2022 and 2023. So we have some good insight here that we're able to look at. The other thing I'll mention is that our sampling methods here definitely match up with the DNR sampling methods, and it's a composite type of method. So it's multiple grab samples from the piles composited into one, and that's the same as we do with our MetroGrow product. It's a composite. All right, so MetroGrow, Class B, 5% solid product, right? Pretty consistent PFOA and PFOS. We don't see anything weird going on. You can see our range is pretty tight. It goes from 1 to 10, 14 there. Again, there's no standards for biosolids, but if you use the interim guidance, I'll show a graph up to explain how that relates because there's a calculation you have to use. But threshold is at about 20 micrograms per kilogram. And so because it's a calculation, if you don't have any numbers above that 20, you're going to probably be good for that limit. So a little preview for what you're going to see in the graph. But I just want to show you that our biosolids are pretty consistent. We do not see that variability that we see as much as our liquid side. And that's because of the way PFAS behaves, right? We know certain compounds are going to partition to that solid side, and those are the only ones that are going to be there. Versus our Influent, which comes from our community, it could be a bunch of all different compounds, right? It hasn't gone through any processes to change the makeup. So that's why you see that consistency here, and that's why you see PFOS and PFOA tracking pretty closely. So this is the calculation you have to use for the DNR interim guidance, and I'll draw your attention to the far right column, which is the combined median of PFOA and PFOS. So to understand how we interact with the DNR guidance on thresholds for biosolids application, the DNR recommends in their guidance that you combine PFOA and PFOS. So you can see here, these are our quarterly sampling numbers for each of those compounds, and then that bottom row is the sum of those. And the far right column on the bottom is the combined median of those sums. We're at about 13.3, and as I said before, the threshold for the DNR guidance is 20 to change any aspect of your land application. So we're well below that, and that's great news for us and our MetroGrow customers. All right, we're switching to Class A biosolids. This is the cake product. This is the 25% solid product. So just to give you a reference point, 25% solid is a little bit like soil type of consistency versus our MetroGrow product, which is more like pudding. So this is more like soil. So it's a lot more solid, and that's going to be important to know because we, as I talked about before, certain long-chain PFAS like to partition to the solid. This is just our 2024 data. This is the pile that was created in 2024, and we sampled it in 2024, right? And so you can see that something wacky is going on. That blue line for PFOA goes down and then comes back up. What's going on there? It's kind of weird, right? We don't see the same thing for PFOS. Well, I talked about that top assay analysis. We did the same thing for our biosolids, and we found that there are definitely a lot of precursors for PFOA in our biosolids, which means while it sits in that pile over time, those precursors have the ability to transform and then all of a sudden make more PFAS. And that's why you probably see an initial going down and then coming back up because we're seeing creation of PFAS in those piles. That's one idea that we think could be happening. There's a lot of other reasons why it could be happening. Could be because the pile, even though we take grab samples from all different areas, maybe the pile itself is not homogeneous, so even though we're taking different areas of the pile, we're still not getting a fully representative sample. There's that possibility. There's the possibility of things happening at the lab. When we provide samples to the lab, they have to take small amounts. We're talking about product that has a liquid component and a solids component. They're trying to get the solids component out, and you have a very small sample amount. Maybe that influences what we're seeing here. So there's a lot of reasons, but it's just good to know the variability, again, of what's happening with these compounds, especially in products that we want to have leave the plant. Looking at our other piles, this is what I think is really the most interesting. I think it kind of proves the point of that first graph. So the first graph was just 2024 pile created in 2024. If you look at the bottom graph, right, this is our most comprehensive data set for the most years. That was our pile that was created in 2022, and we sampled it for 3 years, 2022, 2023, and 2024. If you look at that dark line, that PFOA, it's doing exactly what we thought. So that little mini snapshot, we saw the going down and going up. We see it really when you look at it over time. So it really just proves the point that there's something happening in those piles when they sit, and more than likely, because we found those precursors with the top assay, it's probably a transformation thing, all right? That's really important for us to know because we control how we distribute these products. We control how it sits. We control the product. So the better we understand how PFAS behaves, the better we can adjust how we manage the product to not have it do or have it do what we want it to do, right? Same pattern you see in the 2023 pile that we sampled for 2 years, right? And we're expecting, if you look at the spike going on in that 2023 pile, when we look at our 2025 data, I bet we see that going down, right? I'm just going to presume, I'm not going to say that's what's going to happen until we see the data, but it's going to probably be the same pattern. So that's why having temporal information, multiple data sets over time to compare is really critical. And that's one thing that I'm really excited about our program is because we have had the opportunity to continue the sampling for many years. If you take that information I just showed you for our Class A cake and apply that to the DNR interim guidance for our 2024 cake data, this is what you come up with, right? For our 2024 cake data, you can see on that median of PFOA and PFOS is above the 20 micrograms per liter threshold. What does that mean? What does the guidance say? Well, basically, the guidance says do everything you're already doing, district, because it says you must monitor. Well, we're doing that already. You must sample your biosolids. We're doing that already. It says you must inform your customers about PFAS in biosolids. We're doing that already. We have our website, plus we have a program where we send letters out to all farmers every spring. And it also says you have to look at how you're going to reduce your sources. We're doing that already. As I mentioned, we're looking at our industrial commercial users, how we're interacting with them. So just being above 20 doesn't mean you have to change how you land apply, but it introduces these other sort of things the DNR wants you to do. And the great thing is we're doing it already. So we're all good on there. Looking at all the piles over time, I want to throw this up here because it kind of shows how the variability and how PFAS behaves affects how you apply the guidance, right? So I shaded some of these columns, and it shows that, for instance, if you take the 2022 pile, the very first year we created it, we would have had to do those extra things I talked about. We were above the 20. But it sat for a year, and we sampled it again. You can see it drops down to 18. That tracks exactly what the data you saw on the screen, right? Which meant that in that particular case, we wouldn't have to do anything, right? But then again, you sample it again in the third year, and it goes back up, right? And so it's important for us to know, again, how we manage our product and how the DNR guidance applies for what we have to do. We're not in the business of doing this and saying, oh, we're not going to inform our farmers this year. We're going to do everything all the time, but it's just important to know that the variability does impact how the current guidance is applied over time. So just to summarize our biosolids, the great thing is that we're not seeing anything new. We're not seeing anything crazy sources of PFAS. It's what we expect to see. Things are good in the Effluent. Things are good in our Metro Grow, which is our main land application program. Our Class A biosolids distribution program is an ad hoc, case-by-case request program only, so it's not as big as our Metro Grow program, so we're good on both of those. And our sampling method results are similar. And like I said before, that's really important for moving forward with our monitoring. We're going to have to do routine sampling. Just a preview of what's happening in 2025 and beyond. We continue to sample. We're going to have another year of data. we're planning and looking at our septage. So that sort of big spike we saw in our Influent was a wake-up call to say, hey, let's go back and look at our freight and transport and what other data gaps do we have. Well, we do have a data point that we can control. Our septage receiving is a data gap for us. We do not know what's coming in through septage receiving. So we're planning right now in 2025 to figure out how we're going to approach that. And maybe hopefully in future years you'll have some data on that. We have another tool that we're creating. If you remember back in 2022, we were able to use our Influent and Effluent data that we continue to upgrade a tool to help us determine if we're going to receive PFAS-impacted liquid waste in sort of like a one-off or not consistent through the collection system situation. How does that impact our effluent? That was what we did in 2022, 2023. Well, now we're carrying that forward to how does it impact our biosolids, right? So we need to understand what comes to the plant and how it impacts the products that leave the plant. So that's what the tool is going to help us do. And then our last thing is our lab capacity. We know we're moving toward monitoring and a permit. We know we're going to having to do this not on a voluntary basis anymore, but as a requirement for the foreseeable future. So what is the capacity of our lab to do all these analysis we're talking about? Currently, we send most of these analyses out. We don't have the instrumentation right now to do this. But what would it take to put that into the lab? What would it take to run these samples for the blanks, for the room, the environment, the analyst needs, right? So we did that assessment, and we're using that to feed into our capital planning for actually improving the lab space overall. So it's great to know that we have this information to help feed future planning for the lab. There we go. We're at the end. So I'll entertain any questions. There's the website again for those if you want to see the full report, and it has all of our data up there. So thanks.
Okay, thank you, Marty. Anybody have any questions? Dan?
One question, what is 18 was our highest, where all the stuff was coming from? If you looked at your graphs, it was a light blue. What is which one is 18?
Oh, pumping station sewer shed area. Okay, so I can't read the map, but it's east. Is it purple, green? Purple. Thank you, Eric. Eric is pointing to a map that's showing the pump station that's southeast of Lake.
That's the newest pump station we have, I think, and that's constructed over by Monona by the Beltline near UW Health Clinic, but it feeds, a large area feeds into it.
And I think that's the key point there. It feeds a very large area.
So I think it was a station to help offset 7 flows and everything else too. Greg?
Thanks, Marty. This is really interesting. So, question for you: with the lab redo, are you going to take, or are you going to take on PFAS internally? And if not, who's doing that? Is the State Lab of Hygiene doing it for you now, or is that being fed out to a private lab?
So we're just feeding it as a data point for planning to understand what we could potentially do. I don't think we made any commitment that we are actually going to do that, but we want to make sure if we want to, we can. And currently, our lab we're using, we have a contract with Eurofins. The analysis is not the State Lab of Hygiene, but they do that analysis. Thank you. I'll just add that because we started doing the sampling voluntarily, and the State Lab of Hygiene is a sort of semi-regulatory entity, we want to sort of have an independent third-party lab that was certified in Wisconsin to do the analysis. So we generally don't like to use the State Lab of Hygiene for regulated or unregulated parameters, just for that sort of conflict of interest situation.
Okay, so I've got a question. I don't know if I want to ask it. But the Class A product, we see that change occurring and decreases, increases, whatever. What do you have any knowledge as to what that implication means? So if somebody had used the 2022's Class A sample and applied it on their farm or field or something as a soil amendment, what that does when it's in the soil? We've never really sampled anything like that in terms of what effect these things have when they're used, have we?
Those are great questions. I think there's 2 important points there. One is that even though we saw our Class A biosolids go high, it was still within the DNR guidance thresholds to actually not have to change any type of application rate or how you apply. So from that perspective, the DNR is telling us that even though you're above 20 but below this 50 number, you have to do these extra things, but we're good to go. So in that respect, just because our Class A looked higher than the Class B Metro Grill doesn't mean it's any sort of like higher risk in that respect because of the DNR guidance. When it comes to how PFAS behaves once it's in the field, that's information we have yet to discover. We don't know. There's plenty of research actively ongoing on that right now. That's actually also part of the EPA risk assessment that they're undertaking right now currently. So we're hoping that we will have that information, and the information we have from our data will help inform once we have the information of how things behave in the environment. So we're hopefully be able to connect those pieces soon.
Thank you. Thanks. Anyone else? Okay. So, thank you, Marty. Oh.
I'm sorry, I can't raise my hand for some reason, but I just want to say a couple of things. One thing is I'm happy to see the pile data over the years. I think that's really good. And also, just a comment on the septage data. I think getting that is going to be really important. And I'd like to see more or hear more next time about how you are collecting that septage data. So that's it. Thank you. Good job, Marty.
Thank you. We'll do that.
Okay. Thanks, Beth. Eric, Executive Director update.
Yep, two things here. One I will do, and then Eric Rare will come up. But for me, it's on your tables, but also on our website. Please note the district's Clean Water Showcase that is coming up at the end of next week, public event. Hoping as many people can come as they are available. It's a Friday night or Saturday, or come to both. But the idea is we're trying to do a little bit of public outreach, bring people in a way so they could learn, and then also see our new fish room. So, and then with that, Eric Rare is here to give an update on our Pump Station 2 force main leak fix.
Good morning. I'm Eric Rare, Maintenance and Reliability Manager for the district. I'm here to give the update on the Pump Station 2 force main repair. Just for reference and refresh here, the leak was located on the north side of the treatment plant in some wetland area we own just south of the Capital City Trail. So it's the area there boxed in black. So we had to go through extensive preparation and planning to repair this force main. We had weekly internal and contractor meetings to make sure everything was set up, make sure we were on the right track to get this done and done well. We had to develop a force main draining plan. So the pump station, the area that needed the repair was a lower area, so there was about 250,000 gallons of wastewater in that pipeline that needed to be drained safely and not discharged to the environment. We developed a plan for draining that safely to our pump station 3, which is just upstream of this, or downstream of this, to pump it to the treatment plant. We had to confirm all the necessary parts, repair parts that arrived. There's extensive piping, repair sleeves, nuts, bolts, gaskets, all sorts of items that had to be here and be here on time to get the repair done. We wanted to do this during favorable weather conditions. The last thing we want to do is have a large rainfall impact this repair, have to stop work. We want to get this done very quickly and within a couple days. So we wanted to wait for terminal or favorable weather, and we had to develop develop and test a flow management plan, which I'll go over next. So normally our flow is our pump station 1 pump, which is located on First Street, pumps to pump station 2, which is located in Brittingham Park, which pumps to the treatment plant. Pump station 4 also ties into the pump station 2 force main and comes to the treatment plant. The area of the leak was downstream of all 3 of those pump stations, so we actually had to route flow all the way around the isthmus through a more or less pump it backwards to the treatment plant safely. So we basically developed a strategy routing pump station 4 to pump station 2, pumping that to pump station 1, which would go to pump station 6 to 7, which is in Monona, and to the treatment plant. So basically running all that flow around the lake. We tested this strategy a couple of weeks before the actual repair was to happen. We collected a bunch of data, made sure we could do this safely. I made sure all of our pump stations would keep up with the flows at that time. We also did have a backup plan if needed to divert through our Haywood extension via gravity. We did not need to use that, so good. We developed extensive SOPs to guide staff in monitoring the pump stations during the repair. Our operations staff was monitoring those at night. We had engineering staff monitoring them during the day. We had a bunch of SOPs on how to look at the stations, what data to record, and what to do if various scenarios came up. And we also had dedicated on-call staff for this event for only event-specific issues. So during the nighttime, or even during the day, if something happened, we had 4 staff dedicated to come in immediately to make any repairs. So the repair work, I'll just go through some pictures here and what happened. So we began that flow rerouting plan with pump stations 1, 2, and 4 Monday, October 6th in the morning. And once those flows were rerouted, we set up our bypass from pump station 3. Pump station 3 is the small pump station located on the treatment plant grounds. It also pumps into the pump station 2 force main. Since it's so close to the treatment plant, we're able to set up pumps, portable pumps there to pump that station's wastewater directly to the plant. Once that bypass was set up, we began the force main draining process. So you can see the upper left picture is the bypass pumps at pump station 3. The lower left picture is our force main draining piping. So we're pumping out of the force main through that green pipe into a manhole that goes to pump station 3, so a controlled pump out of that force main. The middle picture on the bottom is just showing the hole cut into actually the 2 pictures on the bottom right there. The hole cut into the top of the damaged pipe with a portable pump in there pumping out of that force main. Once that force main was drained, that took about the first entire day. It actually drained a lot quicker than we thought, but it took about a day to get that drained. We excavated down to the extent of the pipeline, removed the temporary concrete collar that was poured in August with the repair clamp. They cut out the damaged section of pipe. They televised the force main with the City of Madison assistance, so we wanted to actually see what we could see in there. While we had it open, we only got one shot at this, so they ran the camera upstream and downstream of this break to get some video. So, like I said, the top left picture is cutting off that temporary repair. The bottom left is cutting to the damaged section out, and the bottom middle is pulling that section out. Bottom right is the camera, the City of Madison camera going in. So once the televising was done, they measured, and I'm simplifying this a lot, but they measured and cut the repair piping. It's a much more extensive process. But yes, measured and cut the repair piping. They installed a permanent repair. We filled and tested the repair overnight, so we backfilled the force main from the headworks building here at the treatment plant, and basically had more or less head pressure on that just to make sure nothing was leaking out. Once we tested it overnight, found no leaks the next day. The site was backfilled and restored. Normal flow was reinstated from pump stations 1, 2, and 4 back to the treatment plants. The pictures upper left is the repair pieces, and then bottom left is them putting them in. The middle is kind of almost a repair completed. I couldn't find a good picture of the completed repair with all the sleeves perfectly in place, but that's kind of what it looked like. And then you see the white plastic, that's a pipe wrap they're putting around the pipe to protect it. And then the bottom right is just kind of backfilling the excavation. So we want to determine the root cause of what happened here. There's some pictures of the pipe we pulled out right there. You can see some pitting on the outside of it and some corrosion. So I think we're sending part of this pipe to the Ductile Iron Pipe Research Association for analysis to see kind of what their findings are. We also collected soil samples from around the pipe to look for corrosive soils, and we collected groundwater samples as well to look for any corrosive groundwater. So the next steps, we're going to await the results from DIPRA, the Ductile Iron Pipe Research Association, the soil samples and the water samples. Continue to monitor the flows, looking for any abnormalities, and then monitor the location for the break location of the break for further activity. I just want to shout out to Theron Jacobson and Brady Lester. They did an amazing job coordinating this entire repair. So they put a lot of time into this and did a great job. So, any questions?
Okay, thanks, Eric. Any questions? Greg?
Of course. So, actually, I have several. One, I guess, when you opened this up and you looked at the failed section, was it like pinholes in the bottom, Eric, or was it a crack that seeped, or what was it that was allowing it to get out?
So I believe it corroded from the outside in, and then there was 3 or 4 holes in the bottom of it. You can jump into these, please.
Yeah, we thought it was, when it first happened, we thought it was a crack. But, you know, once you pull the pipe out of the ground, you can get a better look at it. And it really wasn't a crack. It was like pits that are close to each other that just kind of became continuous. Inside of the pipe looked great. Outside of the pipe, something going on there.
So then the follow-up is, right, we were out, we televised this. Did the TV report show anything? Or what did
Inside looks great.
Inside looked great, and it looked great even at the failure, effectively,
Yeah,
right?
inside looked fine. The coating on the inside looks great. It's something going on the outside.
All right. That, I would have preferred it the other way around, and I'm sure you would have too.
Me too,
Okay.
yeah.
All right, thanks.
Okay.
So I'm sure my question will seem really elementary after that, but Commissioner Lytle, I was curious, I think this was a relatively newer vintage force main pipe, and I saw in the repair you all did wrapping of the repaired area. Have we implemented any changes prior to this that might give us some comfort in terms of our standards for force mains? And is it, I'm assuming we're going to wait for some of the forensic results before we update any of our design standards for, you know, areas that might be sitting in groundwater or surface water infiltrated around the trench?
So this, no. I can if you want.
So I think we really want to wait and see what's going on here first. There's another thing we're kind of looking into, whether there's something with stray current, since there's a high-pressure gas pipeline that's got cathodic protection and a substation there. So there's more that we're going to have to figure out here as far as science project. What we put in, you know, what was there, it was wrapped to begin with. So it's not like it was up to snuff what we installed before, really. They have changed the wrap in recent years to be a little bit better, you know, provide a little bit different protection. But there's going to be some more investigation here, I think, for what's going on, because I don't think this is typical.
Okay, anyone else? Thank you very much. Hey, Lisa, that takes you up for the capital projects update.
There we go. Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Lisa Coleman, Director of Engineering, with the quarterly capital projects update. So here's just a little preview of what I'm planning to talk about. So this is the last update when I'll talk about things formatted in the kind of the 2025 CIP. So the next update when I come back in January, we'll reshuffle to what's in the 2026 plan. So I'm going to talk through today the projects that are in the various stages, so planning, design, construction, and then I'll talk about projects completed so far in 2025 and also bids received so far in 2025, and then briefly touch on a couple of project highlights. So I do want to call your attention here to, there's a brief report in your packet that we've started to include with these that's got kind of budget and schedule sort of updates thumbnail. So I'm not going to go through that in detail, but I just want to call your attention that we're going to continue to include that in your packet when we do these updates. And then as you know, I'd like to tell you about the pictures here. So construction picture here. So this is the electrical equipment service replacement project. We're building a small building to north of the Effluent building to house some of the electrical equipment. So that's the foundation for that. This picture is like a couple weeks old already, and if you go by there today, there's walls and I think some of the precast roof planks are up there already too. So that's going up fast. All right. So into planning. So starting with those projects, we have them listed here with the stoplight colors. So as we've discussed before, at the treatment plant, we have 2 large facility plans underway. The first is heat and power, which is on track to be complete very shortly this fall. And you will see on the upcoming agenda items that we have a project update scheduled in November to give you some more information on our planned path forward for the heat and power project. But I want to give you just a little spoiler alert update here. So I want to give you a preview of where we're headed. So you might recall that the central question for the heat and power facility plan was about the biogas that we produce at the plant. So what should we do with the biogas? Should we, the 2 options are continue with what we do now, which is cogen, which is basically use our engines to burn the biogas to make power that we use at the plant, or clean up the gas to pipeline standards and then sell it for other people to use as renewable natural gas. So those are kind of the 2 big options. So spoiler alert, we are looking to do the pipeline injection option. Reasons for that are the economics are better and the operations and maintenance are easier. So I will leave it at that for now, and you can look forward to more of an update on that in November. All right, and then the next facility plan that we're working on is the Biosolids facility plan. So that's well underway. We're expecting that to be complete next spring. And then on to the interceptor projects listed. So the first couple of those on the West Interceptor are lining projects. We still hope to begin planning those late this year. We got maybe a little delayed because Theron was working on those, and then he was working on the Force Main 2 repair. So the third one, the West Interceptor on Regent, that's just one we're kind of tracking to coordinate with upcoming projects at the City of Madison. And then the Northeast Truax extension, that's also a rehab project on the east side. So we're beginning planning of that as some of our other projects are wrapping up this fall. And then pumping station Force Main, you won't see anything there because all the planning projects have now moved into the next stage. So, all right, so into design. So next up here is the projects at the treatment plant that we're working on for design. We have liquid processing phase 2 that was mentioned earlier, a very big project. That's on track. We expect to have 60% plans for that in December. For the Lagoon Dike project, we are anticipating bidding that in early 2026. Dryer and seeding, we now have a consultant on board to help us design that, and so that's well underway now. Into the interceptor projects, so you'll see 4 projects listed there. The first one, the manhole rehab on the Old West Interceptor. You'll note in the 2026 CAP, we've kind of parceled that out to complete various pieces of that with other projects. We just did kind of the first piece separately with a related City of Madison project, the development project across the street from Brittingham Park on, street is that, it's escaping me, but thank you, yes. So that is well underway. Nine Springs Valley Interceptor improvements, phase 1 and phase 2. Those are moving along well. They're possibly both a little behind schedule. Phase 1 is the part that's between, or I guess it's just upstream of Pump Station 12. And that, with that, we're working on some route fine points with stakeholders, so we're working on that. The route is challenging there, so that's taken a little time. The Nine Springs Valley Capacity Improvements Phase 2, that's the one along 151. That's at about 60%. We just reviewed those plans, so that one is progressing well. Southeast Interceptor relocation at Yahara River, that will be in conjunction with a DOT project that's coming up to be bid next year, and so we are at like 99.9% plans because they're due to the DOT pretty soon. So that one is almost done design-wise. On to pumping stations and force mains. So pumping station bar screens is well underway. We just reviewed the 90% plans for that, so we should hopefully have that ready to bid shortly. And then the new one you'll see on the list here in italics means new, moved from the previous phase. So the crosstown force main air release valve saddle tap replacement. We've got the bidding documents together for that, and we're expecting to put that out in November. All right, into construction projects. So here's our current major construction projects. So I'm showing 9 of them on the map. There are 4 projects happening here at the plant in blue, and we'll talk about those in a second. Then there's 3 interceptor projects shown in purple. One is up in the Northeast Interceptor up in Wanakee, one along Highway 51 south of the Beltline, which is another ongoing DOT project. And then the Lower Badger Mill Creek Phase 6, which is out in the town of Verona off to the left there. For pump station and force main projects, those are shown in green. I was previously showing those in other updates as teal and was got some feedback that color was difficult to see. So hopefully you can see this lime green nice and bright. So those are Pump Station 17 in Verona down to the southwest, and then one that's somewhat newly into the construction phase at Pump Station 10 on Milwaukee Street on the northeast side. All right. So here's those projects listed with the stoplight colors. And then remember, italics means that it's kind of newly moved into the construction stage. So as I mentioned at the treatment plant, we've got 4 projects underway. For the sludge, this is like a tongue twister, the sludge thickeners 1 and 2 drive replacement. We expect some equipment arrival for that in November, and then the major construction for that will happen next spring. That's kind of a maintenance sort of project, so once it's started, that won't have a terribly long duration. It'll take a couple months once they get going. For the electrical service equipment replacement, that one I'm showing back in green. As I mentioned, the building's going up and some of the major equipment, the major electrical equipment has started coming in. So that one's going to start to move along. For the flow splitter project, we're hoping for substantial completion in November. That's taken a little bit longer than anticipated, but is making good progress. The picture in the top, in the middle on the slide is that project. So that's all the concrete rehab that's happening in the flow splitter right now. And then you'll see in italics there the W4 system improvements that is currently out for bid. And we expect to receive bids. I've got noted 10/21, but we had an addendum yesterday, so that's actually going to be 10/28. So that'll move out another week. But by the end of the month, we should be receiving bids for that project. Then on to interceptors. So Lower Badger Mill Creek Interceptor Phase 6 is finally well underway. All the pipe is in on Shady Oak, the street through there. And paving of that road is anticipated later this month. There's a picture of that on the top right. So that doesn't look like a road, but it is a road. And so pretty soon we'll hopefully have that road put back together and the pipe is all through there. Then work will be in the ravine area, which is going to be the challenging, kind of the tricky part of the project. So hopefully that continues to go well. The picture on the top, whoops, I already mentioned that. Sorry. Okay. Last there is the Northeast Interceptor in Wanakee, which is, we're still anticipating getting that one completed this fall, and that will be significantly ahead of schedule. I think the completion date in the contract is in the spring, but we think we'll be done before that. So that is good. The bottom photo on the slide is that project. That's some of the restored area north of Kennedy Road. The Southeast Interceptor rehab on Highway 51, that's in conjunction with a DOT project. There's a tiny bit left to do there, but we're kind of at the mercy of DOT of when that can get completed. So that one will probably be a couple more months before it's complete. And then on to pumping stations and force mains. So the pumping station 17 firm capacity improvements, that's moving along well. There should be a lot of activity happening in the next couple months as some of the major equipment is finally arriving for that project. And then for the pumping station 10 force main, we've got a contractor on board now, and we will be doing investigative work over the winter. And then we're also waiting on some long lead time actuators for that project. They have a 30-week lead time. So still continuing to see procurement delays on some equipment. So that work at Pump Station 10 will pick up in the spring. Okay, so projects completed so far in 2025. At the treatment plant, we completed the 2021 treatment plant HVAC project. For interceptors, these are new, note the italics. The two newly complete ones that are substantially complete are the West Interceptor Rehab Seago to Shorewood and the West Interceptor Shorewood Relief Phase 3. So both of our projects that were happening kind of along the University Avenue corridor are substantially complete. So that is good news. The picture to the right, I do love an after picture, is the paved bike path and landscaping next to the Shorewood Community Pool that was replaced after we put our pipe through there. So, and then on to pumping stations. Pumping station 17 force main relief phase 2 is substantially complete. We're just kind of waiting on closeout with permitting, erosion control permitting things to get that closed. Then pumping station 4 rehab is also substantially complete. A couple of punch list items left on that, and that's it. All right, bids so far this year. So we've got 3 projects listed there. Again, that doesn't list all the maintenance type projects. So far this year, that's about $6.1 million in new construction contracts this year. And then, as I noted earlier, we'll also soon have the W4 work listed here when we receive bids on the October 28th. All right, couple quick project highlights. The first one I want to mention is the West Interceptor Shore Relief Phase 3 along University Avenue. You guys have heard me talk a lot about that already, so I'm not going to go into great detail, but I did want to mention a couple things as this one wraps up. So the first is these projects that are multiple phases feel especially good to finish. This is part of a multi-phase project that's been ongoing for several years. We started phase 1 at the west end down by Blackhawk Golf Course in 2021. And so it's been a long time coming to get this all finished. The third phase that we just completed was again in 2 pieces. One was by the Shorewood Pool and the University Station Strip Mall. And then the second piece was sort of by the Campus Drive intersection with University Avenue and Highland Avenue, all of that. You heard me previously talk about the extensive coordination and outreach that we did with stakeholders and very complicated traffic control and phasing resulting from that. I am happy to report that that all went very well, and we had early completion by the contractor on some of the stickiest parts of that work. So I also wanted to report that we actually got a thank you note from UW Hospital, UW Health, for incorporating their feedback, for great communication, for minimizing disruption, and for finishing the project ahead of schedule. So I've been working in the public works field for decades now, and I can count on one hand the number of thank you notes that we have that I've ever received. So that's just a testament to the hard work by our team and by the contractor. And then the picture at the bottom is an interesting picture. That's our large junction structure that's in the parking lot of the University Station strip mall, so kind of by like La Brioche and used to be Video Station, but I'm dating myself there, Dairy Queen. Yeah, so it's an interesting structure where kind of a spaghetti of pipes kind of come together there. All right. And then last but not least is the West Interceptor Rehab Seago to Shorewood. So that was completed in August. That was a lining project on one of our oldest pipes. So you can see a map. It's more of an aerial than a map, but at the very bottom of the slide there. So it's along University Avenue. The pipe we lined is in yellow. There was 2 red portions that were emergency repairs that we did a couple years ago, you might recall, but the rest is the yellow that we just lined. So we lined the pipe as well as the manhole structures along there. So it's a trenchless lining project, which means no digging, which means it's easy, right? No, not so fast. So I wanted to just talk a little bit more about what's involved with this, just because so people understand the complexity of the coordination involved in these projects. We have several, as we move into next year's CIP, we have several of these sort of complicated lining projects coming up. So I think it's worth noting some of the, some of the complications of these things. So first, the sewer can't be lined while there's flow in it, so there's bypassing plans required. So that's, maybe obvious, but sometimes a little hard to plan for. This one was right down the middle of a very busy road, which had businesses all along the road. And those businesses are complicated to deal with because 2 things. They have service laterals onto our pipe, so they need to continue their flow. And then they also have, obviously, access and, delivery needs that, and they want people to be able to get to their businesses too. So that also requires some planning to help them with that. And then not only is this, was this a metro bus route, but it had the bus rapid transit line along it. So that's kind of a new complication as that comes in. That particular system has large stops that can't be, a regular metro bus, you can temporarily relocate the bus stop if you need to, but you can't do that with a bus rapid transit. So that takes some more planning to deal with too. Coordination-wise on this project, we crossed many jurisdictions, including Madison and the village of Shorewood and Dane County because it's a county highway, and the railroad because we were crossing the railroad, among others. So many, many people here to work with. So the answer to how did we deal with all this complicated traffic control and coordination, we did the work at night. And there's a couple of pictures on the slide that show that. We had extensive traffic control because working safely at night on a high-speed corridor, is pretty dangerous, so we had to be very cautious with that. We also had to manage bike detours and special truck delivery routes to get to those businesses. We designed the phasing of the project in 8 phases to allow short enough lining runs so that the work and the traffic control setups could all happen in an overnight shift so that no lanes were ever closed during daytime. So that was quite a feat. So in short, it wasn't all simple, and it wasn't simple at all. And Rachel File and the engineering team did a great job. We had a lot of help also from our CSS staff, so thanks to them as well. And also KL Engineering helped us out and did a nice job too. So it's also worth noting that through our extensive detective work here, we identified 25 laterals that were no longer in service, and so we were able to not reinstate those. So that's good because old, laterals that aren't hooked up to anything anymore can be a source of I&I. So that's a good thing to not reinstate them if they're not in use anymore. So that is all I have today. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we have Ezra, you have Executive Director Performance Update.
All I can say is we are working through the process to get on board a consultant to help with the annual Executive Director Performance Review process. Those of us on the subcommittee got an email from Amy earlier in the week, maybe it was late last week, saying that the preferred firm of 3 that we ended up evaluating, she was in contract negotiations with them, fell through. So we're not going to be working with them, and she's now engaged in conversations with the second place one and try to figure out if they can work still and meet our contract needs and that. So there will be more updates, I think, for us on the subcommittee and the whole commission on that as they play out.
Thank you, Ezra. Greg, Finance?
Yeah, so we met last week. We have been busy. Cassie sent out to all commissioners last week, I think, basically an ask, and the ask is from the Finance Committee. We have looked at the remainder of the mission policy book for with regard to the fiscal policies, and Vanessa has gone through and looked at what we have to do, right, from a state perspective. What rules do we have to do? So right now we have that, and we have our policies. We rewrote the 3 reserves policies, in the last couple months. And in looking at the remaining policies, and as you will see if you take time to go through that, there are a lot of them. The group of us, Dan, myself, and Patrick, all pretty much agree that these are a start over kind of thing, rather than try and massage what is a really pretty verbose policies. We would prefer to try and consolidate and simplify for both for staff and for us, and I think add some things. I don't think Dan had to leave, but I think the policies are not particularly well serving anybody at this point. They're complicated. They are hard to understand. They certainly go above and beyond what is required statutorily, and they also are not answering some of the questions that we want answered. So before the committee jumps into a rewrite, the ask for commissioners is, if you see anything in here that you really feel you want to save, or you want to be incorporated into the new policies, let us know. Because our intent here is to kind of pick these off and start rewriting. So, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Vanessa, regulatory and legal.
Good morning, Commissioners. Vanessa Wishart, Legal Counsel for the District. There's a regulatory report included in your packet for today's meeting. There really was only one thing that I wanted to highlight, and that's that there are 2 PFAS bills in front of the state legislature, which we have talked about before, and on October 7th, I believe, there were hearings held on those 2 PFAS bills. I worked with the district on putting together comments in support of those bills. As a reminder, one is a reintroduction, essentially, of a bill that was vetoed last session that would include a municipal grant program for PFAS that includes some grant allocation for wastewater utilities to do the kind of PFAS work that Marty was just talking about earlier during this meeting. The other bill is a liability exemption under the state spills law that covers essentially, among other exemptions, anyone who is land applying biosolids in conformance with a permit, which would cover the district, and property owners who accept land application of biosolids on their property. So we submitted comments on behalf of the district in support of those 2 bills. It was a very well-attended hearing that went for many hours. And so we'll see what happens next on those bills. We'll keep following them closely. I'm happy to take any questions anyone has on those bills or anything else in the regulatory report.
Okay, thanks. Anybody have any questions? Nope. Okay, future meeting schedule, that's, excuse me, in the packet. As noted, we'll discuss and act on the budget at the next meeting. So we have 2 closed sessions, so I'll read them both and get a motion on both, because I believe we need Badger Mill Creek. The first is convene in closed session in accordance with 19.85 Ren 1C of the statutes to consider employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, as the executive director performance review. Second is the commission will convene into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin State Statute 19851G, conferring with legal counsel who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy with respect to Circuit Court Case Number 2024 CV 3109, in Court of Appeals Case Number 2025 AP 1725, City of Verona versus Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. Do we have a motion to go into closed session? And Patrick will go into the first, but then leave, and recuse himself from the second.
Commissioner Clark, I'll make that motion.
Motion by Commissioner Clark, second
Meyer.
second by Commissioner Meyer to go into closed session. Could you do the roll call, please?
Commissioner Bookland,
Aye.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Freeze,
Aye.
Commissioner Havel,
Aye.
Commissioner Longcella, Commissioner Longcella, Commissioner Lytle,
Aye, with the, confirming, what Chair Havel said about, I will only participate in the first, item on the closed session.
and Commissioner Meyer.
Aye. Okay, motion carries. We'll move into the room. Hopefully Badre comes back to his place, or
Yep, I'm here, sorry.
you want to vote on the, on going into closed session?
Yes, please.
Yeah, what's your vote?